Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor K. Srinivas from Pondicherry University. I teach philosophy at that university. I am the course coordinator for Indian religion and philosophy in the subject Indian culture. In this module, we are going to know something about Mimamsa, one of the most important orthodox systems of Indian thought. And this system is attributed to the sage Jaimini. And in this module, we focus on the following learning objects, namely, what is Mimamsa, epistemology, metaphysics, and nature of ethical action according to Mimamsa, and how liberation is possible according to Mimamsa. Mimamsa is also known as Purva Mimamsa, and it is known for its ethical action. It gives a lot of importance to ritual aspect of the Veda, namely the Karma Kanda. The literature on Mimamsa is very vast, and it is mainly composed by the sage Jaimini in his Mimamsa Sutra. The two great philosophers who developed Jaimini's Mimamsa Sutras are Kumarila Bhatta and his student Prabhakara, who lived during 7th and 8th centuries AD. The Mimamsa advocates the philosophy of ethical action, according to which the ethical action is the prime duty of every individual as a moral agent. It is the supreme governing force of the universe. The central concept of Mimamsa is that there is something called concept of Dharma, and it is the ethical potency or force or power of merit and demerit which controls and regulates this universe. It is Dharma that controls the universe. It provides the agent of action what he desires and what his action deserves. In other words, the Dharma of Mimamsa is to uphold an ethical action. Therefore, Mimamsa attaches so much importance to philosophy of action, for it recognizes every human individual as an agent of moral action. Coming to its epistemology, being a philosophy of action, Mimamsa admits that the reality of the agent, the individual, and also his actions. Therefore, it builds its epistemology in support of realism. Mimamsa accepted certain sources of knowledge, pramanas, as valid, for they reveal the world as it is. Hearsay and rumor are not considered to be the valid sources of knowledge according to Mimamsa. For example, these are the following important sources of knowledge recognized by Mimamsa. They are perception, pratyaksha, inference, anumāna, verbal testimony, sabda, comparison, upamāna, presupposition or postulation, arthapatti, and non-cognition, anupalabdhi. The Bhatta Mimamsa accept all these 6 pramanas, but Prabhakar Mimamsa admits the first five, but not non-cognition or anupalabdhi. According to Bhatta, non-cognition or anupalabdhi can be merged with perception. Now coming to perception or pratyaksha, which is one of the most important pramanas, and this pramana is accepted by all the schools of thought in Indian philosophy. It is a direct form of knowledge obtained through senses and mind. The senses come into contact with the objects, mind with senses, and the Atman with mind. When mind and senses come into contact, knowledge arises according to Mimamsa. Otherwise, the Atman as such is pure consciousness. The distinction between indeterminate, nirvikalpaka, and determinate forms of savikalpaka, forms of perception, is also accepted by Mimamsa. In the case of indeterminate perception, the object perceived is not conceptualized, therefore its identity is not known or revealed. But in the case of determinate perception or savikalpaka, the object perceived is conceptualized, therefore its identity is known to the perceiver. In other words, in the indeterminate form of perception, the knowledge of universal is not involved, whereas in the determinate form of perception, the knowledge of the universal is involved. This is the fundamental distinction between nirvikalpaka and savikalpaka forms of pratyaksha, and perhaps the Mimamsa view of perception is not drastically different from that of Nyaya Vaiseshika in this respect. Coming to inference, anumāna, the Mimamsa theory of inference again is akin to that of Aristotle's. In Indian epistemology, the inference covers only syllogistic reasoning but not the entire thought process. In Indian logic, in general, the major premise has to be accompanied by an example. The major premise as a universal proposition is a true induction. The universal relationship between the middle and major terms is that cause and effect, whole and part, substance and quality, class and individual. In the first case, there is no need to state all the premises. Now, Mimamsa admits two forms of inference. They are inference for oneself, swartha, and inference for others, parartha. Now, coming to comparison or upamāna as one of the most important sources of knowledge, Mimamsa holds that one does not deliberately compare two objects. Mimamsa does not use comparison for this purpose. It is a spontaneous cognitive process in which one observes similarity between two objects. When a person sees a water buffalo for the first time, he makes an effort to see the similarity between it and a bison. This similarity makes him remember a bison. Therefore, comparison is not a deliberate act of perception. Rather, we compare objects in the process of perception. So this is one of the most significant features of comparison in Mimamsa. Now, how is comparison possible? There is something called a memory element, which compares the present with the past. Such a memory is neither voluntary nor involuntary. It is the observed similarity takes one back to his memory to show a relation between two objects, namely one that is being perceived, the one which was perceived in the past. Therefore, we always try to show the link between the present and the past through comparison. Similarity is not an object of inference, for it does not involve any kind of syllogism here. Therefore, the cognition of similarity is a special kind of cognitive process in that the mind has the inbuilt capacity to identify similarities between objects. Now coming to arthapatti, the postulation or presupposition. We posit something in order to make a particular unit of cognition complete. Our understanding of a given fact becomes incomplete without accepting the truth of something unobserved. That something unobserved is postulated or presupposed. This is also a spontaneous cognitive process of human mind. For instance, we observed a person being fat, but person does not eat during the daytime. Then we presuppose that the person in question compensates it during night time, for otherwise he or she cannot be fat. So postulation is a distinctive kind of cognition by a way of which we obtain the knowledge of the world. Now, when we come to anupalabdhi or non-cognition, here non-cognition does not provide us with absence of knowledge, rather it provides us with knowledge of absence. There is a fundamental between absence of knowledge and the knowledge of absence, which we need to recognize. For instance, when someone says that there is no television in this room, the person in question is obviously referring to an object which is not present there. Thus, such knowledge can be treated as the knowledge of absence, but not the absence of knowledge by any means. Now, the knowledge of absence becomes the part of our scheme of knowledge or our epistemological framework. But Prabhakara rejects it on the ground that absence is not a positive entity. Therefore, one cannot have a cognition of what does not exist. This is the argument advanced by Prabhakara against anupalabdhi or non-cognition as a valid source of knowledge. Instead, he brings this particular form of knowledge under anumāna or inference. Coming to verbal testimony or sabda, Mimamsa holds this knowledge obtained is through words. Verbal knowledge becomes a distinct way of knowing. It cannot be brought under inference. For instance, one cannot understand the meaning of the word raven through inference when there is no major premise here. There is also no invariable perceivable link between the word raven and the object raven. Therefore, for the first time when we understand the meaning of a word, it is not through inference, but through a person. But verbal knowledge can be false like any other form of knowledge. This is admitted by Mimamsa. Coming to semantics and the philosophy of language, which is so important for Mimamsa, It does not regard all words as eternal. Mimamsa does not regard all words as eternal. According to this school, the conventional ones are derived from eternal words, but they non-eternal like the Vedic words. Also, it is held by the Mimamsa that there is no special word pattern apart from the word. The word consists of letters and word is made up of letters. Of course, this is very clear in philosophy of language. So there is no letter pattern apart from the letter sounds. Every word directly refers to a universal called jati. The particular can be referred to the word only through the universal. Now, coming to valid forms of knowledge, sometimes we get a doubt whether what we perceived is true, and is there any really an object to be perceived. Knowing is a form of human consciousness, and the form of knowledge and its nature are both forms of consciousness. We know objects only through consciousness. Therefore, we have to accept the reality of objects as they appear to some form of our consciousness. But is it necessary that every object given to one's consciousness real? Therefore, there is a need to determine what forms of process of consciousness are valid. There are immediate and mediate forms of cognition. The doctrine of determining the different valid forms of knowledge is called the doctrine of pramanas. According to Kumarila, the means of cognition and its result are two different things. But for Prabhakara, the means of cognition and its results are one and the same. There is absolutely no distinction. If result is the same as the process, contents Kumarila, then there is no difference between inference and perception. This is the argument advanced against Prabhakara's view by Kumarila. However, when it comes to the validity of knowledge, both Kumarila and Prabhakara admit self-validity of knowledge, swatah pramanyavada. The doctrine of invalidity is called the doctrine of invalidity due to other, paratah apramanyavada. Therefore, the truth of any cognition is revealed by the cognition itself. The falsity of any cognition is revealed by some other cognition. A true cognition is never made true by any other cognition, but only confirmed by subsequent cognition. But the falsity of any cognition is not revealed through itself, but through second cognition that contradicts it. This is the fundamental distinction between swatah pramanyavada and paratah apramanyavada according to Mimamsakas. Coming to metaphysics. The metaphysics of Mimamsa is fundamentally the metaphysics of ethical action, because it gives so much of importance to ethical action. The ethical action becomes its metaphysics. Mimamsa's interest in the efficacy of ethical action is viewed as God himself by Mimamsa. The efficacy of an ethical action is the force that creates forms of the world. Imagine that there is no ethical action, then there is no activity in this world. Then there are no forms in this physical world. Therefore, it is the controller of the things of the world as real. The world is meant for action and it is created by action, according to Mimamsa. Action is the most important aspect of human life. An individual makes or unmakes his destiny only through his own actions. Now, the ethical action of Mimamsa invariably brings in the notion of Dharma. What is Dharma? Dharma is the central issue for Mimamsa. It is that which supports the universe or binds the universe, brings the universe together. Dharma is that which holds plurality together rather. According to Jaimini, Dharma is that which impels man to perform action. It's a kind of a catalyst. According to Mimamsa, anything good must be achieved only through action and is also Dharma. In other words, action is identified with Dharma in Mimamsa. Dharma brings forth the desired fruit of action. If Dharma is ethically right, then the fruit that it produces is enjoyable. If it is ethically wrong, then it brings forth suffering, hence called adharma. Now, dharma is a potential force or a shakti known as merit or demerit. These two are the only good and bad qualities attributed to humans by God or society because of the kind of actions they perform. Because individuals perform either good actions or bad actions. Dharma as a potency is the unseen force or a drishta. This force resides in the Atman of the agent. It controls and determines the future life of the Atman in this life and also in future lives. Therefore, for Mimamsa, the doctrine of karma is the doctrine of dharma. Both karma and dharma are associated with commandments. Now, Mimamsa classifies action into three kinds. They are obligatory actions, which are to be performed by every individual towards the other as a kind of an obligation. If every individual performs his obligatory actions towards other men and society and universe, he may not derive any special merit for that. Prohibited actions are those that produce demerit, but their non-performance does not produce any merit. This is the second category. But there is a third category of action, according to which there are certain actions which are purely optional. When an individual seeks some special reward, one has to perform them. But the performance of these actions for the sake of obtaining something special cannot be treated unethical. Here you can see a picture representing Hindu Dharma or the social action of the individuals, how each individual belonging to a different social class or a group performing his or her duty for the sake of duty. Now coming to Atman. The Mimamsa admits the reality of Atman. It is something different from mind, manas, sense organs and physical body. And this Atman can also be characterized as I consciousness, Ahmadi. This is what is known as Brahman according to the Upanishads. Now there are plurality of Atmans. All of them are responsible for their own actions, rather ethical actions. Each Atman is individual and infinite, yet Atmans can exist together. Consciousness is not the essential nature of Atman, but consciousness arises in Atman when it comes into contact with mind. Although consciousness is an adventitious quality of Atman, according to Mimamsa, yet it is treated as seer, doer, and enjoyer. One cannot attribute the qualities of seeing, doing, and enjoying to mind or to senses or physical body. Mimamsa holds that Atman being the subject knows the object which is independent of it. Then there is also knowledge of object. This is possessed by Atman alone. Thus we come to know the existence of Atman. One of the most distinguishing features here is that consciousness is not the essential property of Atman according to Mimamsa. It is something accidental or adventitious. Now coming to liberation, one of the most important aspects of Mimamsa's soteriology, Mimamsa does not admit the role of God in liberation, for it completely dispenses with the role of God as creator. The world, according to this school, does neither have beginning nor end. Since the Vedas are eternal, there is no need for God to create them. God is not required as a supervisor on the earth. Of the four values of human life, the first three alone were originally accepted by Jaimini. They are wealth, artha, enjoyment, kama, righteousness, dharma. The fourth one, moksha, was accepted later on by Kumarila and Prabhakara. But later Mimamsakas admitted reality of the God as the author of the Vedas and turned out to be the theistic. Originally, Mimamsa looked down upon the notion of liberation. One has to follow the injunctions of the Veda for right ethical actions. Thus, man is destined to live a life of ethical action in every possible birth. But the ethically good would attain heaven. So therefore, the notion of heaven is very important and significant in Mimamsa soteriology. But it is a state of undiluted, intense pleasure and is the reward of ethically good life, means to attain heaven. The ideal of life for Mimamsa is a life of continuous ethical activity and enjoyment of its fruits. To summarize, Mimamsa is regarded as one of the most important orthodox philosophical systems of Indian thought. And in the foregoing discussion, we came to know that there is absolutely no distinction between karma and dharma. Mimamsa believes in ethical action. Therefore, karma is nothing but dharma, the force behind the karma. It is dharma which propels individuals to perform ethical actions. In the absence of dharma, karma is not possible according to Mimamsa. But this karma may lead to two types of action: ethically good actions and unethical actions, which are termed as bad actions. Those who perform good actions attain heaven according to Mimamsa, and that is a state of calmness, and it is the highest state according to Mimamsa. Now, by following the injunctions of the Veda, one resorts to pure ethical action. Therefore, Mimamsa does not attach much importance to God. It is through this action every individual attains heaven, which is a state of undiluted, intense pleasure. There is nothing but action to be performed. And if a person does not perform any action, Perhaps according to Mimamsa, his life is not worth living. So therefore, life according to Mimamsa is nothing but life of action. For further reading, I request you to go through the e-text. Thank you.